Hello and welcome to another episode of For the Love of Sports. My name is Michael Raziel, and this is the show where I get to talk about sports, I get to talk about business, and I get to talk about everything in between. My illustrious guest today, I have Vince Cicero. He is the Senior Vice President of Partnerships and Broadcasting at FC Cincinnati, formerly with the Detroit Pistons as their Director of Sponsorship Sales, Director of Corporate Partnership or Corporate Sales, Marketing, and Broadcasting at the Cincinnati Bengals, the COO of the Western and the Southern Open, Head of Sales and Global Partnerships at Ironman. The list goes on and on. Vince, how you doing today, man?
Michael, doing well. Thank you for having me.
Pleasure is all mine. As I told you before, I'm excited to walk back in time with you, kind of trip down memory lane a little bit, get to learn a little bit what some of this stuff was like back in the day, I think, as they like to say, and kind of where we
Yeah,
are now with the new stadium opening with FC Cincinnati, and you being able to kind of mold this in your image as you see fit. But before we get to all that, Vince, the first question I have for everybody on the For the Love of Sports podcast is, why do you love sports so much?
well, that's a great opening. I'm probably like a lot of other people in the industry, originate a little bit just from participating in sports and growing up with sports. So, as you try to figure out what were you going to invest 40 to 60 hours a week in, it's certainly fun to operate in an industry that had a lot of passion for. So, as someone who grew up playing basketball, running cross country, and really loving all the North American sports. As I was picking an industry, this certainly was one that I wanted to scout out, and I've been fortunate to get in, not get out, and have been able to build a career. So it's a lot of fun, especially given the amount of hours that everybody always invests week to week in whatever it is they're doing.
Exactly. If you're gonna put 40, as you said, 40 to 60, most likely a little closer to that 60 every single week. Might as well
Yeah,
do something you're passionate about, right? Might as well add that little extra layer of enjoyment to it.
absolutely, absolutely. No, it's been fun as I've even changed sports all the way through. You have a different vision of it, maybe when you're thinking about it coming out of college versus once you get in the industry. But it's a great, great industry. Probably relatively small on a national
Mhm.
scale, but very powerful.
Yeah, I'm finding the more people you meet in the industry, the closer you get to just about everybody, which is kind of funny. So that's why I always enjoy doing these and having these conversations. Because hey, maybe as our good friend Gerald Jones introduced us, hopefully there's someone cool that you can introduce me to later down the road. But we'll get to that. We'll get to that. We have enough time there.
Absolutely.
So one way, as you said, you switched sports, you've switched cities. I mean, you've been, as I said before, we had the Pistons, we had the Bengals, we had tennis in there, Iron Man. So there's your running. You're obviously now working in MLS in soccer. So I
Yeah.
guess kind of the way I would love to start this conversation a little bit is being in this sponsorship and partnership and in this sales, this corporate sales space for the last, 20 some odd years now. How have you seen it change for the better and for the worse over that period of time, especially being able to weave through multiple sports and endeavors as you have?
Yeah, I think probably the biggest change is the decision process for those that are investing in sports on the sponsorship side. When I think back to the earlier years and why some of those decisions were made, the amount of research that was involved, or maybe lack thereof, at that stage relative to today, that's probably the most dramatic change. I think there's a lot of pressure on marketing executives as they decide where the resources of the company going, whether it is a publicly traded, a privately held, whatever it may be. Those dollars are more closely scrutinized current day than they maybe were when I was first starting. So I think along the way, the analytics that's needed, the substance that you need to show, what is it that you're providing, what's going to be the return, why is it that I should align with that property, I think is a bigger piece of the process of having the discussion and getting to a decision than it maybe was 20 years ago. And I think that scrutiny is good. In the end, if someone's going to decide whether it's 100,000, a half million, or a multi-million-dollar investment, those are important resources for a company. And why should they align with your property? And some of that's going to be the analytics that you can show. I think there's certainly a confidence level that they're going to have in the people that they're dealing with, that they trust they're going to be good caretakers of their investment in your property, and that the organization views the partnership as important to them and is going to treat them well. And I think certainly 2020 has been the year when it's been the ultimate test, because I think a lot of partners have now found out, how am I going to be treated by that property? When times get this extremely tough, how are they going to treat me in this situation? So I think at a broad level, the scrutiny of the decision is certainly much, much greater current day than it was. And I think that's a really good thing.
Yeah, I mean, I think the opportunity with analytics and data and statistics now, while statistics can tell whatever story you really want them to tell in certain situations, as we do know. I mean, what's the famous quote about marketing and advertising? 50% of it's wasted. We just don't know which 50%, right? So I think
Mhm.
with this data and with these analytics, you're able to find out where the opportunities really lie. I think, as you were saying 20 years ago and even before, a lot of these deals really came down to emotion, right? It was emotionally, I want to be attached to that brand, a brand like the Yankees, for example, they're winners. We want to be attached to that. We want to do, we want to be winners too. And now, obviously, with the eyeballs and everything we can see in social media has helped with that. But I guess in terms of learning those analytics and learning to tell that story, how have you been able to develop professionally and understanding the best ways to utilize those statistics, those analytics, and really then not just utilize them from a sales perspective, but utilize them from a, hey, this is how we can add more value if we do more X, Y, and Z here for these partners because we want them to be happy, right? We like it's always funny with salesmen. Like,
Right.
I'm not just looking for a quick sale. I want you to be here again because it's way easier to continue to sell you over year after year rather than going out and finding new business. So, how do you use the analytics and that data from both the perspective of, hey, this is how we can help use these to sell more, but this is how we can help use to add more value to our clients?
Yeah, I think the clients have probably fueled that evolution because it really comes down to what is it that they're looking for or what is it that they're looking to measure. Sometimes the focus is, we know exactly what our audience is, and I need to see who your audience is to know that there's a match. So the analytics might be all around, what is our understanding of our clientele, their shopping habits, obviously the base demographics, but to show what is that match that we're providing. For other partners, it's playing in a space where they're looking at the exposure and they really need to understand the visual, both who is in the venue, stadium, arena, or otherwise, and who is watching and how much are they actually seeing. So some of those analytics are controlled by the team. Many of those now are contracted resources that you can provide third party certified data as to the audience, the measurement. Digital social is ever evolving because I think our own partners look at it differently now than they did 3 years ago, than they did 6 years ago. And how do you really use that to leverage the relationship? So I think our partners have probably steered us in the direction that we needed to grow because we needed to be able to answer their questions or show them results. And so we've tried to, I think over time now, taking that so that at the front end, we're taking into account of that. So, easy example, if we're talking about signage, TV visible signage, we're talking about at the beginning, we're going to be able to show you the measurement of this. And we can show you what like results were, for another partner in the same situation so that they have that at the front end as they're making the decision, as much as the partner who's trying to best understand the audience and give me the deep dive on their habits, the demographic, the factors that will be important to them. So we probably incorporate more on the front end based on our year-to-year learnings.
Interesting. Look at that. And I'm very grateful that we get to have this conversation because this is going to be a lot of fun. I'm in partnership and sponsorship sales, so it's always fun to get to talk to someone who's been doing it a couple days longer than I have. Hopefully, I can learn something
Couple
from
days.
just a couple, just a couple. So with that, I guess let's one other question. One thing that I've been noticing, a good friend of mine, John Balcom, wrote a book about it. 3 Win Sponsorship. Shout out, John. Um, one thing that we've been seeing a lot more is cause marketing kind of
Yeah.
making its way into sports. Obviously, we've seen what happened with the NBA and everything with the Black Lives Matter and them protesting or striking for a game. I don't know exactly the correct term because of what they wanted to see change. And then we saw the Bucks get on the phone with their attorney general of their state and literally start to institute change. Now, some people are all about it and some people are not. I'm not here to have that discussion, but we're starting to see athletes, teams, and leagues pay attention to that more and understand that the platform that they have is very much unlike any other in the country and the world. How have you, especially again over time, seeing how this is changing and now with your new role with FC Cincinnati, how have you taken that into account and understanding, hey, certain brands, they might do some shady stuff or they might do some stuff that if it comes out that we're attached to them, it doesn't look great, vice versa. There are certain brands that are doing things in the world that we want to align with as well. How much do you take that into account and how much do you go down that rabbit hole of understanding every single thing that could potentially come from one of these partnerships?
Yeah, what I'd probably say is I'd blend a little bit what you'd say is cause marketing with your community initiative.
Mhm.
And I know for our organization at FC Cincinnati, one of the key pillars is being very involved in the community. We've got the largest community relations staff here. Our foundation does a lot of work that, last year gave back $1 million into the community. So that blends into what you may call then cause marketing, because I think we're authentically there. You certainly get to some hot point issues where you have to decide where do you step in, where do you don't step in. There's parameters around that. We certainly take into consideration, as I would think most team sports, what is your league's perspective on it? Because we want to certainly be in step with how our league is viewing things, how we're then viewing things in our individual market, and where it's appropriate for us to step in, where it's not appropriate. And as you noted, the players can be their own entity too. And there's some things that they may be more comfortable doing or maybe more or less aggressive doing than the club. And I think what's important is the dialogue. So I know as we've even gone through the current year, there's been a lot of discussion, with the players to understand their perspective. There's been a lot of discussion with the league to understand their perspective. I think it all ties back to what is the role you feel in your community. We view sports, if you look at the size of our organization, in the US, it's relatively small. If you talk about the visibility of our property, it's extremely high. We have a big impact for our size because of the passion that consumers have around sports, how closely they pay attention to it. So when we say something or don't say something, it's maybe more noted than otherwise the size of our organization might be. So it's a constant conversation. I think it's part of your DNA and your fabric. I'm with an organization right now where being involved in the community is critical, and we put resources, we put energy, and you have to make careful decisions and decide when it's appropriate to step on the gas or not. And I don't think there's any magic answer other than having a lot of dialogue on that platform and making sure between your league, your ownership, your partners, your fan base, what is the right step to make or not make. And those are, I think, critical decisions every organization in sports has to make just because of the built-in platform that we all have.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and I think it's as you said, there's no magic pill. There's no no right time to know exactly when to do these things. As we've seen with the NBA, much of that was organic and kind of came up out of what has happened around the country. So I think it is just something important that you kind of have to just be always paying attention. And kind of as you said, I also think it's great that you have an open dialogue with the athletes, the players, and understanding where they're coming from, because the sports is such a weird. The employees are also the product. And that in very few situations is where you get that. So while it's a very interesting dynamic, and it sounds like you're doing a great job at just at least hearing out and understanding what is going on around the league and what is going around specifically with your team, which I think is all you can do at this point, is really just understand and listen.
I mean, there's a lot of constituents in the group. So certainly as you're thinking about each step, you have to think about how will your own players view it? How will your front office organization, certainly your ownership, your partners, your fan base. There's a lot to take into account. There isn't always one answer that pleases all of those entities, so you have to weigh it.
Yeah. I mean, it's difficult to say the least. So let's take a step back in time a little bit. So you had a
Yeah.
big role with the Pistons, as I said before, director of sponsorship sales. You were there for a couple years in Detroit. So this was back in the late '90s. So no
Yeah.
internet. I don't. Did the internet? What was email like in the late '90s? Give me that. I'm kind of curious about that.
Yeah, right now, current day, whether it's the efficiency or the volume, I would say this: there's certainly, or there was a lot more work done via phone and discussion.
Hmm.
That today, plus would be more efficiently via email, or more impersonal via email,
Hmm.
depending on how you look at it. Some people will
Yes.
be efficient in that use, and some people maybe that's their only path of travel, that they will communicate. So some of those change, issues and things you're working through might be very similar, but the technology certainly gives you different ways to get it done.
Yes, I can only imagine. I mean, I still don't understand how people did it back then, but kudos to you. I'm sure it was again pluses and minuses to all of that. But
Yeah,
spent a couple years with the Pistons. You then went on to the Cincinnati Bengals. You were there for about 13 years, if I'm not
13
mistaken.
years.
So
Yeah,
with
yeah.
with the Bengals director of corporate sales, marketing, and broadcasting, it's obviously a very big role in both of those places. I'm kind of curious, less from the day to day aspect, but more from that period of time, the difference between cities like Detroit and Cincinnati. So I'm out here on the East Coast, about an hour from New York, about an hour from Philadelphia. I won't sit here and lie to you and tell you I know that much of a difference between two Midwestern cities, relatively the same size in my brain. Like, what was the difference working in that type of environment, those two different cities, especially during that period of time? I mean, you're now back in Cincinnati, obviously, but and then also the difference between the football and the basketball aspect, because I really want to put that in perspective. I want you to put that in perspective for people to understand. Football is it's just on a complete, as there's four major sports here in the United States. There's football and then there's everybody else. So I guess I'm kind of curious, those two bigger positions that you held earlier on in your career, what some of the comparison and contrastion were between those sports, those teams, and those cities.
Yeah, well, certainly on the market side, and Detroit is a very different place. I mean,
Okay.
over time that has evolved. At the time I was there, where the automotive industry was really humming along, the county that we operated in was the fourth richest county in the country. So you had a lot of wealth, you had a lot of power that was running through Detroit, and it's always been a great city, even as it's evolved over time. But during that point, you'd really view that as a big major market. Pistons was a powerful franchise, had won a couple championships at that point. They've won even more since then. So even as you had national discussions, it was certainly a property that resonated very big. So I think the opportunities, run a little bit deeper in bigger markets. You also many times have more competition in markets like that, where you might have four major sports, and then as I first arrived at Cincinnati, it was is two really with the Bengals and the Reds, and now three as we've added FC Cincinnati. So you've got the dynamics of bigger, more powerful markets versus a mid-sized market, but then you also have more competition, and you have different engagements with your fan base. I think in a big market versus a mid-sized market between the two. So I enjoyed both. I couldn't say that there was one that was better than the other. I like the variety of what that has meant, being able to operate in a city like Detroit during that time. I was with the Pistons, and I've loved Cincinnati all the way through. I'm probably more of a Midwest guy, having grown up in Milwaukee and been Milwaukee, Detroit, Cincinnati the majority of the time. From a sport perspective, and Detroit was certainly with the Pistons, it was far more than just the NBA, because it was Palace Sports and Entertainment. So at that stage, we had hockey. We were launching a WNBA team at that time when I was there. We had two outdoor amphitheaters. We had events running through the building. So it was a multifaceted entertainment, which was probably why it was such a great learning experience, because even as much as I loved NBA and the experience of what it is, I also had all the other learnings that came through that. And then with the Bengals, certainly, and as I arrived, we were launching a new stadium, going through that construction, building out the organization quite a bit. And the NFL is huge; it's a monster. Just from a pure broadcast perspective, you've got a lot of eyeballs that are on the sport, both in the markets that they operate and outside, which makes it a little bit unique. And it's a powerful brand. And the offerings vary greatly, though, depending on if you're representing an NFL team, an NBA, or now, as I'm in MLS, there's variance amongst all those. So the power of it somewhat depends on what you're looking for, or what partners are looking for, or what the fan base is looking for, where there's wins and otherwise, and looking at the options. But I enjoy both settings. They were both very different, a multifaceted sports property in Detroit, and then working for an NFL team and the strong presence that creates in an individual market, especially in a city that loves football and in a state that loves football.
And hopefully they can get a couple wins soon, because my goodness, those Bengals, man, always rooting for them. Always rooting for
Good
them.
quarterback, though. I like Joe Burrow. So excited. Follow it every weekend.
Crossing my fingers for you guys. Don't get. I have a buddy that lives out in Cleveland, and yeah, same thing with the Browns, man. It's just one of these days. One of these days, one of them's gonna be good, and everyone can rally around it. But until then,
Yeah.
well, I guess we wait. But so I mean, I think it sounds like the opportunity with Palace, obviously, as you said, the multifaceted and so much more to learn there. And then what with switching, going from having almost a portfolio and kind of being able to talk to multiple different companies and understanding their needs, and saying, rather than, square peg round hole, saying, okay, this is what you're interested in. Well, this is part of our portfolio that we can, offer to you. And this is how it would fit your needs. With the NFL and the Bengals, what were those conversations like in understanding people want to be associated with something? As you said, with the amount of eyeballs we all just saw, the NBA finals, the clinching game had half of what just a random Sunday night football game does, in the year, which is why we understand the NBA is not going to be having their finals that time of the year anytime soon. But what was that aspect of it like, going from kind of having that portfolio down to saying, like, this is our one property and it's significantly big, and this is how you can utilize it? Less of, I'm not going to say strong arm, but less of a flexible opportunity with Palace, or more of a flexible opportunity Palace, than coming
Right.
down and kind of almost saying, hey, this is our one thing, take it or leave it. What were those conversations like with those partners, and getting them to understand still the value of both aspects of it, those
Yeah.
two different companies?
It's a good question. On one hand, it made life a little bit simpler.
Mm-hmm.
I went from a venue that was operating about 150 events a year, where you really felt like, okay, which days this week am I working events and going to have clients, down to where you had a 16 game schedule, and it was more defined. So I think on one hand that simplified it. It changed some of the offering too. I mean, if you think about it, with NFL is a powerful broadcast property, but for the most part, other than current day with the tarps and some of the signage, it's also one that has a very clean on the broadcast. So a lot of what you sell as a team, you're not necessarily selling that camera visibility, because you only have select positions, unlike some other sports, whether it's soccer, baseball, basketball, where you've got on-camera signage. So the offering is a little bit different. It changes the dynamic. There's the element of partners who align with the broadcast property, because it is all about the telecast, and then other partners who want to mix that along with the presence in venue to be able to interact with 60,000 plus and what is hit by camera. But it was honestly, it was a pretty dramatic change of focus. I mean, you really zeroed in on one thing, and that cut both ways. That was good. And then that also maybe limited some of the different discussions that you could have. And that's probably over time, with some of the various moves that I've made, the variety has made it fun during that time frame.
Yeah, and I think that, it's fun, right? Get a little change, flexibility, have some fun with it. But again, working
Yeah.
for the NFL, with the NFL, I think, as you said, it's just a powerhouse, and there is nothing else like it. So I think that part it's always interesting to discuss. So after the Bengals, you went and moved on. You were the COO of the Western and the Southern Open, and now, so you talked about helping kind of launch that stadium in Cincinnati. This with the Bengals, obviously, we're going to talk about that in a little bit with the with FC Cincinnati as well. The move to tennis.
Yeah.
I get, was the offer just, one you couldn't refuse? Was it more of, hey, I wanted to have that flexibility. I want to get a little different, especially after being with the Bengals for, over a decade at that point. Where was the itch? What itch were you trying to scratch to, leave there and get into tennis? I mean, did you
Yeah.
always like tennis? Like, I'm kind of curious.
No, no, which is it probably was the most stunning thing for people as they found out I got in because they probably assumed I grew up a tennis player. No, I mean it was really the convergence of a couple different things. At that point, I'd been with the Bengals for 13 years, so it was the longest run. And you certainly get to a point where you're continually wanting to do some different things, challenge yourself, and after 13 years, that is a long run in one spot, I think, for anybody that is in the industry. So there was certainly an interest in exploring. But I think for most of us in the industry, too, you get to what's your family situation? And a lot of times you're having to make decisions in this industry because there are only two or three jobs in a given market that you've part of the move of adjusting through the industry is changing cities. So you have to accept that at the beginning. And I've got plenty of colleagues in the industry who have made far more moves than I have, and they've changed multiple cities in the process. And then others who have been in one spot for 25 plus years, and it's worked out great. I think everyone's got to make their own decision. I think at that point it was I'd been in one spot for 13 years, was ready for a move, and had an opportunity, one of the few opportunities that opened up in the same market without having to relocate. So what they were really looking for was assistance on the revenue generating side. It's it's one of the top tennis events in the world. And I was familiar with it. I was a big fan. I attended every year. It was 3 miles from my house where the venue was. They were about to go through a major capital expansion. They were combining the men's and women's. And they really needed, they didn't need tennis expertise because I had absolutely nothing on that front. But they needed revenue generating and how do we figure out the best way to monetize it. So the ability to make an exciting move like that without having to change cities, especially at a daughters in school, that I could make that move without impacting the family, made it a little cleaner decision. I'd had other things that came up during my time at the Bengals that were attractive opportunities, but then when I looked at what does this mean for the family, it didn't weigh out to be a positive move, so just passed on those opportunities. So I think it was really the unique aspect of it was in the market and was probably the only other job in the market that would have made sense to go to. And even though I didn't have background in that sport, that really wasn't what they were looking for. So yeah, year one, didn't know a lot about tennis. By about year three, then I felt like I actually knew what I was talking about on that front. And, having been around people like Roger Federer and Serena Williams and all the great athletes that are in it and all the great people that work in tennis, that was certainly a special experience.
That is, yeah, that is pretty awesome. And as you said, it's a new challenge. It's something else to learn, but more importantly, it's with your family, right? Like in sports, what I hear constantly is that you need to move around a lot to continue to climb that ladder to get to where you want to be. And many
Yeah,
people have to do that within their first, 5 to 7 years right out of college. And I know people that have had, 3 jobs in a 12-month calendar year because they have to, okay, I'm here at the Bulls. Okay, now I can go to the Hornets where they'll, now I'm manager of ticket sales. And then I can go to this
right.
other position where I'm, director of ticket sales or whatever. And that's kind of the easiest, quote unquote, easiest way, I guess, to move up. But it also makes you have to move however many times you have to do whatever you need to do, and some people are great at that, and that also then weeds out some other people from the industry. But thankfully for you, you were able to have a couple moves. You said the Bucks, then the Pistons, then obviously the Bengals, and then with your
Yeah,
family entrenched in a city, it's difficult to move, as you said, two young girls. Your wife, who I'm sure she wanted to spend time with her friends, her family, whoever's there, and I'm sure you didn't want to just get up and leave. So this was
right.
sounds like the perfect position, I guess. With So again, now thinking about the offering side, right? So you were going from the Bengals, the NFL, the behemoth of the sports
Right.
world here, then going to tennis. And now I don't know what, if we're going to rank NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, MLS. esports, like where does tennis fall on that line? And with it being a specific tournament, how much
Yeah.
did that make it, again, probably simplified it, but how much more difficult did it make it when trying to do what you needed to do in terms of generating that revenue?
Yeah, I don't know that I'd rank it on difficult as much as dramatically different. I
Hmm.
mean, what the big change moving from football to tennis in that setting was with football, you've got a lot of passion around your team
Hmm.
and it exists year round. And you're mostly a regionalized event for the most part. You've got certainly some NFL teams that have the broad national appeal, but the majority a regionalized event. I move into a tennis event, which was bigger and more powerful internationally and nationally than maybe even within the region. It was an event that drew from nearly 50 states because of the athletes that came in, with a large international viewing audience that was looking at it. The demographic was extremely high, as you maybe would expect in tennis. So the offering was just very, very different. The passion was around the event, some of the passion was around individual players, but it wasn't a team sport. And there weren't wins and losses. So people would come to the event, have a great time. They maybe would be upset that their favorite athlete lost, but for the most part could have a great time. In a team sport, for good and for bad, is you have people walking out of the venue feeling really good or feeling really bad based on how your team did. So I don't know that one is better than the other. They're just dramatically different. The audience was different. The global scope of that property versus regional NFL, very different. But the passion of an individual team is much higher than around an event per se. So I enjoyed the variety. Again, kind of the variety of the multi-sports in Detroit, to then narrowing it down to a team, to then narrowing it down. I had friends in the industry who kind of joked. I went from 150 events down to 16 events down to 1 week. As I kept zeroing in, and then we were wondering whether I was going to move to a one-day event to follow after that. But I've enjoyed the changes, some aspects of it that were very similar from stop to stop. But yeah, that was a pretty dramatic one. Everyone assumed I must have had a background in tennis to be in tennis just because of the move.
I think that's funny. Pretty soon you're going to do the Olympics, right? It's going to be 20 days every 4 years, and you can call it quits after that. But no, I think it's really interesting. Again, kind of just seeing how your career has evolved over time, and then after the Western and Southern Open, you then go on to Feld Entertainment, which
Yeah.
it's explain it to me a little bit. It's more of that agency feel, where again now you're back to a gigantic portfolio of opportunities. So talk to me a little bit about that before we move on to Iron Man, which again is
Yeah.
much different as well.
Yeah, it was honestly somewhat similar to the Detroit situation where you could have offerings all the way around, whether it was Supercross, Monster Jam, Disney on Ice. We were launching Sesame Street at that point. You could almost have an offering for everybody, but was very much a national property. So you weren't, with the role I was playing there, it wasn't individual shows in individual markets, but trying to sell it on a national level. So it created a different set of challenges for how do you position that. You certainly had a wide portfolio depending on the demographic that a client might be trying to reach, but depending on the markets that the shows or the performances were going into, there was a lot of pieces to the puzzle to try to put it all together, but probably, aptly described as an entertainment property more than a sports property. So that was probably much different than most everywhere else I've been, where it came back to a sport. That had a little bit of it with Supercross, but for the most part was more of an entertainment property than anything else.
And then after Feld, you then hop into Iron Man, which you were
Yeah,
there for a couple months, about 6 months, I think, as you said,
yeah,
before you were able to move on to FC Cincinnati, which we're going to talk about here in a second. But
yeah,
with Iron Man specifically, right? So you're kind of back in that sports space a little bit more. It's more of
yeah,
like it's a brand. There's events. It's like a really interesting property, and it's very ravenous. Like the people that like Iron Man love Ironmans, right? Like
Yeah.
it's a very passionate. There we go. That's a much better word. It's a
Yeah.
very passionate fan base. How are you again going kind of through these changes and learning along at each of these stops? What was something that you were able to take away through the stop at Ironman where you were at to really understand again? Kind of, I assume it's a little bit closer to that NFL fan base where it's very much more passionate, just on a significantly smaller scale.
Yeah, really about the individual versus the team. And then there was aspects of it that was like tennis because you had a high-end demo
Hmm.
to participate in a lot of those events. I mean, it takes a lot of resources, both time and financial. Great, powerful brand. I think it was the number two tattooed mark in the United States behind
All
Harley
right.
Davidson. And you'd see the athletes, and aptly, they took great pride in the accomplishment of what they did. So I love the brand, love the passion around it. Your fans are almost your athletes because those are the consumers, the participants. When you're at a race, a lot of the individuals, especially on the Ironman side, because we also had the rock and roll marathon side that was part of the entity, but on the Ironman side of it, you had the athletes themselves, the family, and they've invested months and months of training. So we had a great passion. So where we had partners that aligned to hit that demo, to communicate with them, you knew you had an audience that was going to pay attention to any of the communication, as opposed to maybe a broader team base where you're going to have some of the passion, but not as dialed in fully as Ironman, which is unlike any other. And then the rock and roll marathon side of it was more, broader participant running events, easier entry for people to be able to run than to really do a full Ironman event. But great properties.
Yeah,
Love the time there.
it's an interesting because right, like you can be a fan of some of the athletes, right? You can have your favorites, but then you also can literally run alongside of them, for lack of a better term, in some of the
Yeah.
same events, right? So it's such an interesting property from that sense where some of the partnership deals that I'm sure you were able to accomplish while you were there were probably very integrated in certain situations, right?
Yeah, and a lot of them, they really wanted to integrate into the story of the athlete.
Hmm.
Because I mean, the most fascinating thing for me, and many have seen a lot of running races, and you'll see a half marathon or a marathon. You'll be somewhat surprised that everyone who's finishing doesn't have the typical
Hmm.
runner look. It can come in all shapes and sizes. And with Ironman, because of the demands of what you're going through, it becomes even more amazing at the variety of people, ages, body types. It was pretty incredible. And the story for why people did the event, like what drove them to do the first one. And some it was one and that was it. That was their, sports life accomplishment, and others became then addicted to it and did it on a regular basis. But the stories were so amazing. So that was some of the fun, was trying to figure out how to integrate the partners with the storytelling, because again, there was great passion for it. And how do you align that brand with the athletes and with the power of the brand of Ironman? So a lot of creativity in that space. Wasn't a huge broadcast property, other than the championships each year. But otherwise, a lot of the races, that wasn't a big TV property. There was just other reasons why brands would get involved.
And I have to ask. I had a Iron Man friend on the show, Bob Babbitt. Did you ever have the opportunity to hang out with him a little bit?
Know the name well. Know
Okay,
the
yeah.
name. Yes. Yep.
He's a cool guy. So anybody out there
Yeah.
listening, go check out Bob Babbitt's episode. He's done some
Yeah.
interesting. He ran one of the first Iron Man events in Hawaii, and then has created essentially an entire media company out covering it, which I think is
Yeah.
he's a cool guy. Very
Yeah.
very nice, very cool guy. So all right. So let's after Iron Man, you were there for a couple
Yeah.
months, as we said, and then you move on to FC Cincinnati. You've been there
Yeah.
ever since. You are the director of sponsorships. Oh no, I'm sorry, the senior vice president. Wrong job. Senior vice president of partnership and broadcasting at FC Cincinnati. You're a part of the team that's helping open up that stadium. So this is your third kind of
Second,
second
2 years in. Yeah.
years in. So you're helping open up that stadium. You're helping find partnerships. I mean, what What was the opportunity again, again, wanting to go through all of this again, now you're going to a smaller sport compared to football, compared to maybe even tennis here in the United States. I'll let you tell me that. But what was it about this opportunity that you needed to come back to Cincinnati and say, yes, this is what I want to do. This is how I want to build the rest of my career for the time being, at least.
Yeah. I think a few things. One, the FC Cincinnati story is pretty amazing. And having been in market, I was at the Western Southern Open at the point that it was being launched. It went from 3 years of USL minor league to then being awarded an MLS franchise, and now the franchise only being 5 years old. It had such a quick rise, and I remember going as a fan to the very first match and looking around and thinking, this is an impressive audience, but a lot of people may be coming out for the first one. And then I also went to the third or fourth match that first season, and the fan base continued to grow. And you realized there was a lot of support in the market for the franchise, to the point where the club was then averaging over 20,000, and then last year it was 28,000, which was really the fuel for why MLS awarded a franchise here to Cincinnati. So I've been somewhat enamored as a fan of the team and as someone in the industry at the fan support and the rise that was here. And I think a couple other factors. I've been fortunate in that I opened an arena in Milwaukee, I opened a stadium here in Cincinnati, went part of through the major expansion that was going on at the Western Southern Open. And when I think back to all the different things I've done, some of the most demanding, stressful, difficult, but also rewarding things have been the venue related. There's a lot of pressure when you go through that. And the idea that they're going to be building a $250 million urban stadium in a market that I have great passion for, and obviously a lot of history, having worked here, and friends, family all over the marketplace. That's a pretty attractive draw. You've got a little bit of a Cinderella story around a team that has this rapid rise because of the passionate fan base. They're building a brand new venue with an ownership group that is absolutely stellar, community minded, and then to have it all occur in this city, that made that move pretty easy. So even Ironman was great and would have continued down that path, but the opportunity to come here, the organization that it grew from 30 to 40 people as a USL franchise to 110 or so, whatever we are right now. We went through a huge influx of about 60 or 70 people within about a year, which is kind of fun. We've got some people in the organization that are employee number one, employee number two, that I see all the time. And then we've got the newbies who have arrived, just within the last couple of years, and including myself, as we try to build this all together and try to create the best fan experience that we can, try to give back to the community, knowing where it was going to be built in an urban setting, knowing it was going to have a lot more impact beyond just a standalone facility, but the other growth opportunities that would spur on because of the number of people that would come to the events, whether it's an FCC match, a concert, other things that we will bring there. It's an exciting opportunity. It was an exciting opportunity when I, made that decision and joined 2 years ago. And time has been flying by. And between now and the spring, when we open the venue, so much work left to be done. But it's fun to go through the stressful process. But that was really the big draw.
Yeah, and I think it's got to be a lot of fun, right? You wouldn't do it if you didn't enjoy it at least a little bit. And
Yeah.
again, having so many friends and relationships and colleagues within that market already, probably already, as you said, it kind of helped speed that process up and speed that process along a little bit. And I guess what is it like trying to find? I mean, I'm sure FC Cincinnati had partners, had relationships prior to the opening of this new stadium, as you said, that which will be here in the springtime, but what
Mhm.
is it like? I mean, I'm sure you're also looking for new relationships, and as you said, now it's going to be in an urban setting, and how are you going about finding new opportunities within this? Because stadium openings don't happen all that often in every sport. I mean, you hear about maybe one a year, and I think that's got me football. Obviously, over the last couple years, there's been kind of a nice little boost there, but I mean, you get one in baseball maybe every couple years. Same thing with hockey. You don't find those too often. This is a huge, huge opportunity that you have. How do you try and take full advantage of something like this, especially in a market that you're very well accustomed to?
Yeah, well, I think the great thing about soccer, and whether that's here in Cincinnati, there and with teams that have launched in Nashville and Austin and St. Louis is coming up and all that. It's such a high growth sport, and the great thing is it's more it's bigger globally than it is within the U.S. But I think the momentum of what is occurring right now in the U.S. is significant. Our franchise here is a good indication. I mean, you went from not having a franchise to having a minor league franchise to then launching an MLS franchise where you're averaging 28,000 a game. But I think with soccer, it opens up a lot of different doors. So our discussions are not just in the market, but they're also nationally because of the presence that soccer provides, the interest that it provides in the platform, and also internationally. So some of the companies that we are in discussions with now, it has a lot to do with the familiarity that they have with the sport within their own individual countries. And with MLS taking all of the matches are distributed internationally. So even as we talk about what's occurring in our venue here in Cincinnati, we've got broader distribution for that visibility. So it's a little bit different than a North American only property. You know, a little bit akin like on the tennis side where you had to think about the international reach and what are ways to monetize that, and how do you find alignment where they might not know where Cincinnati is in the United States, but they know this is a popular soccer property that has great support and provides some of the broadcast visible opportunities that exist outside the U.S. So that makes that fun. So I guess we try to think about it on multiple levels. There's certainly the in-market, and the reasons might be for the business they drive, impact that it might have for their employees, growth opportunities that they're looking at to use the platform that we can provide here. And then others, might be some traditional MLS soccer focused national advertisers where they're looking to align. It might not have been specifically about Cincinnati, but it was because we've got an MLS franchise here and we've got this young, vibrant fan base that they're trying to reach for their product, and then trying to capture the international attention. So it has a lot of different approaches, and yes, with the venue opening, it creates a special opportunity now. But I think a lot of those special opportunities will exist even 3 years from now because you'll still have that great platform that's growing.
Yeah, and it sounds like it's a combination of a lot of the things that you've done in the past with that regional aspect, with the opportunity again with the stadium. As you said, you're gonna have concerts there, you're gonna have a lot of other things there. So we're drawing upon your time at Palace, drawing upon your
Yeah.
time, at with the Bengals, obviously being specifically in Cincinnati as well, but then also the international reach, that international aspect with tennis. I'm sure there's player marketing that you guys are trying to do as well. Kind of drawing upon what you did with tennis as well as with the Ironman. And it's just kind of cool how all of these things have come together to allow you to utilize some of the things that you've learned along the way. And I guess, specifically with soccer, as you said, it's a major
Mhm.
growth sport. We're seeing it kind of just explode over the last 5 to 10 years here in the United States. It's been around for a very long time, as we know, but, if
Yeah.
one of these years we actually win a World Cup match, I think that will help. That'd be kind of cool. But in the
Yeah.
meantime, we have guys over in the English Premier League, one of the more well-known soccer leagues in the world, and we have some Americans that are just absolutely crushing it over there. I guess, over the last 2
Mhm.
years, especially with some of those guys, I think Christian Pulisic over in
Yeah.
Chelsea, one of the more well-known ones, a young guy, really good at what he does. How have you seen the sport grow, and how have you seen different opportunities come about? Because we're starting to hear more American names over in some of these leagues around the world, which again will only increase the popularity here in the United States.
Yeah, I think certainly everything that has gone on in Europe has helped fuel the interest level. When the franchise launched here, a lot of it started with having the Saturday morning discussions in the pubs and the bars around the area while they're watching EPL matches and saying, if we had a franchise here in Cincinnati, what is it that you look for? But their interest was in their passion, were some of the teams there. And I think the more American success, certainly that helps grow the game. The more that there's presence internationally, that grows it even more. As we think about it, you've got some of the audience that is dialed in on the sport of soccer. And I think we've got a lot of fans in our market. It's about the event and the passion at the matches themselves. I mean, it's an electric atmosphere. We've got a supporter group called the Bailey here, that if you showed up at a match, you didn't know any of the players on the field, didn't understand what offsides was, didn't follow much other than the obvious of a goal that was occurring, you could still have a great time because you've got a built-in cheering section for 2 hours that is creating a fun atmosphere. And I think not to be undersold is the fact that it is a 2-hour event. So for the pressure of all consumers, everything they've got going on in their family life, their business life, and trying to figure out where is it they want to spend entertainment time and dollars, the fact that they know they can walk into an MLS match start to finish and it's 2 hours is very valuable, whether that's a family because of what that means for the kids and attention span, or that's for busy young adults who just have a lot of other things that they're trying to manage during the course of it. So I think certainly for us, an advantage is the speed of the event itself, the built-in passion for the events. And I think as things continue to grow with U.S. success for the soccer fans, following overseas or those that then come back and develop here, that just makes it even better. So we certainly seem to be in a very sweet spot right now for growth in the United States as we look at all the launches of these great MLS markets and new venues, because all these new markets are building new venues. So we're excited to open up ours, as will Nashville, as will Austin, as will St. Louis, as they all continue. And you've got a lot of right-sized venues too. I mean, we'll have a 26,000 seat venue that we fully expect is going to be sold out. It's going to be supply and demand. That will make for a great audience versus if you're trying to play in a 50,000 seat venue, you have the same 26,000, but you don't quite have that energy level that's there. And I think all the venues that are being built across the league are like that. I mean, there's spectacular venues, LAFC, Minnesota United, great venues, and they're all building upon one another and taking great ideas.
Yeah, exactly. You're not trying to recreate the wheel if someone's done something well. We have those teams out in Seattle and Portland where they are very passionate about their fans. We see it every year, which is always so cool. So they're doing something right. Just try and do what they do. And to your point about 2 hours, that is kind of one of the nicer things about soccer, right? Like, I love baseball. These 4-hour-long baseball games, man, it's starting to okay, all right, we're going to step off. Okay. And, same thing, college football. I love football. One of my favorite sports, but some of these games, 3.5, 4 hours long, it starts to be like, all right, come on, let's do something.
Yeah.
Or, yes, I know, certain people, they say against soccer, there's not a lot of goals, so I want to see more action. At the same time, if you're not going to see it, let's get it over with a little bit quicker, right? That allows people to go do things and get on with their lives, as you said, especially with kids. It makes it a lot easier for the families, which I think is pretty important.
But even with the action in the venue, what's unique about soccer, unlike any other North American sport, is you've got cheering that occurs throughout the match. The supporter groups fuel so much. I was excited as we went around and we've been scouting new venues and trying to take good ideas. And I was out at LAFC, and their supporter group section was about the same size as what we're going to have in the new stadium, and realizing it's double the size of what we have right now. And to hear the volume of the cheering and the energy that created in the venue, I was looking at my colleague realizing we're going to have double of our Bailey once we get to the new stadium and the energy level that creates. So it's a different form of activity. In basketball, obviously you can have scoring every 15 to 20 seconds as you move through it. You don't have that in soccer, but you've got a lot of built-in energy through two jam-packed hours of activity.
Yeah, I think it is awesome. I'm very excited to see what you guys get going there. And I know we only have a couple minutes left, so I do have one last question. Especially,
Yeah,
obviously, the pandemic going on has probably made things a lot more difficult for everybody. But the MLS's
yeah,
back tournament, I think it did pretty well.
yeah.
Considering they had everyone down there in the wide world of Disney. Obviously, certain teams didn't. It didn't fare so well with the virus and everything. But how have you seen what's been going on with the pandemic and kind of getting people excited to kind of be back in stadiums again and get to see those things again and get back to what is, slightly a more normal way of living than we have over the last 6 to 8 months or whatever it's been.
Yeah, there's certainly been a lot of pent up demand. And so the league did a great job with launching things in Orlando and getting things back. And that was the simple pleasure of being able just to watch it. Because during all those times when you had no sports on TV of any form, to be able to get back and now to slowly, market by market, venue by venue, you're having some level of fans that are able to go. And I know even our fan base, they certainly, as they think ahead to next year in the new stadium in 2021, it hasn't slowed down things on the ticket side because they just are looking ahead to those better days when we're all, as a nation in a better spot to get back together at sporting events and concerts and movies and all those kind of things. But yeah, the challenge of what occurred March, where you couldn't, April, when you couldn't watch anything, to now at least we can experience it. And step by step, I think everyone's learned a lot of patience, a lot of flexibility as we kind of work through this all together.
Yep. And that's really all we can do. But Vince, this was absolutely fantastic. Sincerely appreciate your time. I have Vince Cicero, Senior Vice President of Partnerships and Broadcasting at FC Cincinnati. Vince, where can everybody find you on the internet in case they want to ask you a couple questions or follow along in your journey?
Well, certainly on Twitter, at vcicero, VCICERO, is always an easy way. So love to connect and certainly appreciate your time, Michael.
Awesome, man. Thank you so much, Vince. Appreciate it. Talk to you soon, man.
All right. Thank you.